everyone, welcome back to another episode of Unbossed, where we are flipping the script on leadership. Welcome, my co-host Gloria. How are you this morning?
I'm great. Really looking forward to this conversation. We've been talking about some wonderful things, and this is going to be one that makes people a little uncomfortable. We're going to try to flip the script on that one too. So,
Yes, please, please. I am one of those that hates conflict. I hate having hard conversations. That is one of the biggest struggles I have as a leader. The last time we talked about positive reinforcement, which was a very, very fun conversation. That's something that's quite easy for
really,
me. And so now we're going a little bit deeper that when there is some feedback or some correction that needs to be made, constructive feedback, and how do we make that not so cringy and uncomfortable? So I am going to defer to Gloria on this because she's the expert. I'm still in learning mode on this one. I'm glad that I get to teach this and learn it and be a facilitator and do the because I'm like getting it from all angles and hopefully it'll stick. But I have had some hard conversations since I took the curriculum, and I gotta say, I am quite pleased with the result. And what would have been a very hard conversation was a very easy conversation, which is like blows my mind. So I am very excited to unpack this with you today. This is a big topic for leaders, and it's constructive feedback. So tell us, Gloria, we talked about positive reinforcement last time. Now we're going to talk about constructive feedback. What is constructive feedback?
it's part of the coaching process. When you've hired somebody on your team, you've ideally done a really diligent job of making sure that they're the right person, the right fit for your organization, your culture, and the job. And we set the expectation. We have to be proactive with coaching. That's positive reinforcement, which we've already covered. And it also includes constructive feedback. And we need to rewire our brains about what constructive feedback is all about. People hear the word constructive, and what's the word that they attach to it? Critical,
Criticism.
right? And that's not what we're talking about. This is not about criticizing people. This is about giving people feedback to be better. Think about the word construct. That means to build up. And that's the mindset that we need to have with constructive feedback. And it's thinking about it in the terms of somebody is performing well. And there's like they're 98% there, maybe a little tweak here might just make it, be the cherry on top and be good. We tend to avoid giving those tips along the way. And we need to think of them as tips. We tend to avoid giving tips because, well, we think they should know. We tend to avoid giving tips because, well, we're going to wait and see if they correct it. And then we're building up our own frustration. And then we're into now we've got a problem. And that's where people feel really uncomfortable. What we're talking about here is let's not wait until something's a full blown problem to address it, because then we really shy away from those things. And then we make those one way, and we're not doing a problem solving approach. Constructive feedback is part of the proactive coaching. And it is looking at it and saying, okay, well, I've got a good person. They do these things well. I think if they made a little change, it'd be better. And we can do this with so many of the things that we have in our work world. What went well and what would make it even better? And one group that we worked with at the HPWP, they had WWW and EBI. What went well and even better if. And if that's our mindset, then it becomes easier to recognize that here's what you do well in that. And here could be a tip for it'd be even better if you made this slight adjustment.
That's how we have an apprentice that's working with us, and the we get a form every week to fill out, and we get some ratings on a scale of 1 to 5 on these three things. And then what went well and what would make next week better.
Those are good things to think about. When you think about them in that way, it's less scary. It doesn't feel near as much like, oh, I have to come down on the person. It doesn't feel like conflict, like you're headed toward a conflict kind of conversation,
Right.
because it's real matter of fact. We can do this look on anything. We do a project. At the end of that, what worked about it, what would have made it even better? We have meetings that we have, maybe standing meetings. Well, what's working about the process we're using? What would make it even better? We do the training. Our cohorts, we just launched a survey. What worked about this cohort from your perspective? What would make it even better?
Yes.
That's what we're talking about when we're talking about constructive feedback. Because constructive feedback is not just a problem. In fact, it's not a problem. It's a tip or consideration. And constructive feedback is balanced. It's easier to receive it when it's balanced with some recognition about the things they do well with regard to that, right? So it could be related to something, customer service. Gosh, you really have a nice style when you're interacting with the customers, and I hear you on calls. I think it might have an even bigger impact if you ask the customer this question or that question, right? That's what constructive feedback can look like. It's in the context of the situation or the topic. You're recognizing strength that they have, and then there's an opportunity for a tip in there. And constructive feedback, thinking of it as a tip, it's a tip. People can take it or leave it. And I think that's part of what leaders can struggle with, which is, well, if I'm going to give them a tip, I want them to do it. What I want people to do is to think about what could be a better way. Now, if this turns from a suggestion and a tip to, we've got a performance gap now they have to correct it. But we tend as leaders not see the in-between, which is, let me recognize what they're doing well with regard to it, and what could be a small tweak that could take it to another level.
Okay. So this is similar to positive reinforcement. We want to be giving these on a regular basis, it sounds like. So this is something you want to do on a regular basis, make this part of.
I think positive reinforcement, deliberate and intentional, and with constructive feedback, I think my tip would be in the beginning, spend more time on positive reinforcement because you're building people up. Makes it easier to give tips. I mean, because otherwise what you're doing is some people are more sensitive than others. And if your goal is to give somebody a tip every week, you may be searching for stuff that's not as meaningful. We can also, what I like better is to ask the other person, you tell me what worked about this project, what went really well, and what tips or suggestions do you have for it another time, right?
Give yourself, just facilitate them giving themselves constructive feedback.
Well, when people can see it themselves, and maybe I'm speaking for me personally, is if you ask me what went well about it and what would make it even better, I can come up with that stuff. And I want the tips. My face doesn't always say, I want the tips, right? I do that. Let's get it over with. I do value the feedback. And so if you're asking me for what worked about this situation or this project, and what do you think would have made it even better? I can come up with stuff right away. That's me processing my own environment. That's me learning and growing from it. And then I get to have somebody else say, yeah, I think those are good observations. I'm getting a little bit of positive reinforcement along the way. And sometimes they have another tip in there for me. And I can go, that's a really good point. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I like that, facilitating it for other people, because if you have good people, you want them to be thinking like that. Yeah. What went well and what could be even better in the future.
You can do it with so much in your work environment. And when you do that, it becomes even easier when you're doing it, personally with someone. I mean, if you're uncomfortable to start with how you operate team meetings. Okay, guys, what's really working about this? Go around the team, get feedback. What would make our time spent together even better? Everybody gives that feedback. If you're really comfortable with stuff, ask for feedback about yourself.
What do I do really well as a leader? And what could I do better?
And the team. What do you appreciate about the team? Or what do you think we do really well with respect to teamwork and collaboration? What tips do you have to make it even stronger?
I think that gives us a really good understanding about what constructive feedback is meant to do and where it's meant to be placed. So we have positive reinforcement, constructive feedback. Now you mentioned a performance gap coaching. Yeah. Which is a different thing. So what's the difference between performance gap coaching and constructive feedback?
Constructive feedback is they're still doing a really good job. Think of it as they're 98% there. And maybe if they made a small adjustment or considered doing something different, it'd be fabulous. Whereas performance coaching is, I need them to be performing here and they're performing here and we've got a gap. And a tip or a suggestion isn't enough. We need to peel back the layers and find out what's causing this gap in performance. Because once you find out the cause of the gap, then the person can start identifying solutions. to it.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, that's a situation where we just go to warnings, get better, or else. If we are focusing more on the proactive coaching, reinforcing good stuff with positive reinforcement, creating an environment and culture where feedback and tips, recognizing the good and identifying some things that could make stuff better, when we're creating that kind of culture of feedback, we end up in the I got a problem that I got to deal with kind of conversation a lot less, because coaching is that proactive coaching is leading the way.
So that's the difference between when you have a performance gap, that's different than what we're talking about. We're talking about people are performing, they're getting stuff done. This is really just performance coaching. Like it's like, hey, here's something you can bump it up. And it's not something that you require them to absorb and to
And,
change.
and that's the key thing.
Okay.
And sometimes people will become defensive and they'll say, well, I don't agree. And then rather than get into a battle with it, our mindset needs to be, well, I just thought I'd share that observation with you. Good people process that stuff. They don't have to agree with you to have heard you, because they'll go away and think about it.
They'll come back the next day or the couple days later.
Yeah, and they've processed and they're like, oh, it probably was a good suggestion, or I get where they're coming from. What do I want to do in response to it? So that's really where the focus is. And I love that you said they don't have to do it. Somebody has to change. You're in that different conversation. We tend to put a lot of control as leaders on, I think you need to do something differently. You either need to tell me what you're going to do differently, or I'm going to tell you to do it this way. And that's not coaching performance. That's just telling people.
That's micromanaging.
It's micromanaging. You're not getting to commitment. You're just going to get people to comply.
Mhm.
Okay, if you want me to do it that way, whatever. Versus you recognize the good in the situation, because there is good. It's not made up stuff. And gosh, I think if you took a look at this side, we could have a different outcome. What do you think? You don't even have to give them the tip or the solution. You can cause them to say, look, I think you handled this part really well. I'm wondering if maybe going a little bit deeper, asking a couple more questions might have a different impact. What do you think?
I think that this is so interesting. And now we ask, because the Heart Profit approach is a holistic approach. So we're talking about mental well being for our people, we're talking about high performing teams. And how do we have both? And you're talking about giving people tips around their jobs and things of that nature. I would even suggest that we start as leaders. Well, what I hear you saying is, as a leader, I'm a coach. As a leader, I'm a mentor. And these constructive feedback are just tips I would give as a mentor, not this is what you have to do or you have to do
Yeah.
something different. Okay, so now I'm understanding this better. So we're putting on our mentorship hats when we're doing this.
Yeah.
I would like to take it even a step further and say, if you notice something your people are doing that could be causing more strife for them personally, that it would be, once you build that trust and that compassion with positive reinforcement, you could also give them tips and constructive feedback on maybe the way they're looking at life, or maybe their perspective in life, or maybe their outlook on something, or maybe the way that they're doing something that's causing them
Yeah.
continued struggle. It was like, we go back to my sister, that's such a good example, in that, Griselda, her boss, as she got to know her better, she started recognizing that there were other areas of stress, high stress, in my sister's personal life that undoubtedly are impacting her professional life. So she recognized her financial situation in her personal life, which has nothing to do with the boss, right? And in the olden days, it's like, leave that stuff at home, don't bring it in here. Priscilla actually gave her some tips on, hey, and some encouragement. And you can turn that around. And she started paying off her debt, and she started getting her finances in order. And then when that happened, that's when Griselda said she started showing up to work different. She started showing up to work with more confidence and with more pizzazz. Like, she put her makeup on a whole bunch extra and extra, she dressed up and she came to work differently
Yeah.
because she gave her those constructive tips outside of the professional stuff. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say, as leaders, we have the ability maybe not the responsibility, but the ability to impact our people's personal lives as well. And so I would say when you're building, if you have that trust and you have that connection, don't be afraid to offer a mentorship tip. And what would you say to that?
I think I agree with it. There's power in giving people tips. I mean, you can even, sometimes the tips are, gosh, you put your whole heart and soul into this. And I'm a little worried that you're gripping the bat too tight. And here might be the impact of that. Or it can be, you're doing this really well. I got to tell you, I'm a little concerned about the impact that it's having with the things that you've said that it's having on you personally.
Or
And then
yeah, or I see you working, at 10 o'clock at night or 9 o'clock at night, and I'm afraid of the impact on your mental health if you're not getting the sleep and the rest and the break that you need.
yeah, and then it doesn't have to be a conversation to
Mhm.
continue. You get to give that to them as some awareness
Yeah.
along with some positive recognition, and that makes it okay or more comfortable, less uncomfortable, whatever would be the word you'd want to use, to go,
Mhm.
okay, well, she sees that, she recognizes that. Let me take a step back and look at the situation from a broader perspective. And then I'm maybe a little more willing to open up to come back to my boss and say, gosh, I appreciated sharing that. And here's what I'm thinking about doing differently. What do you think?
Or my workload is a little bit more than you know it is, and then we might need to rethink that. But it opens a conversation that if I'm saying, "Oh, you're working a little too much," then it opens it up for the employee to say, hey, this is why, and maybe there's something that maybe it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Yeah, I think we wait until we see bigger problems. It could be somebody who's usually so service oriented, so easy to work with. And then you start to see a little shortness in a little tone in their voice,
Mhm.
a little shortness in the way in which they communicate. And we tend to not address that because we just let it go until now I'm really bothered because this person's got an attitude.
Yeah.
Rather to say through constructive feedback, look, the person on the team who's always just so positive and upbeat. And I've noticed lately that you've been a little more short and abrupt in your conversations with me and others. And to me, that's a bit of a tip because I don't have to problem solve it for them there.
Hmm.
Recognizing the wonderful things that they do. And I'm saying, look, here's a little bit of what I'm seeing now.
Hmm.
And I don't have to pry, but if I throw that out there and I show genuine concern about what's up, then I'm opening the door to say, tell me, tell me about the workload. Tell me about the stuff you got going on at home or whatever the case may be,
Right.
or in your relationship. I'm making it a little safer for someone to say, well, here's the deal, right? Here's my frustration.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's not anything you can do. And sometimes for the person, it really is gosh, okay, I need to take a deep breath. I need to check myself. And, I get a chance to do a bit of a reset. And sometimes in that it's like, okay, that's a non-issue. We get constructive feedback. We do a lot of Zoom calls with our team. And I'll have when we're on a call, I'll have a team member text me and says, everything okay? I'm like, yeah, why? Oh, your face says otherwise. Yeah, God bless her. She'll just say, check your face in a text. And I don't take offense to that. When you have a really strong team connection or strong relationships, then you don't even have to recognize the good. You go straight for what's the RBF glow kind of thing. So, and when that comes your way, because I've gotten that a couple of times, I'm like, oh no, everything's fine. Now I know I need to consciously, have this
Let your face know you're
what's in
fine.
here and what's in here.
Right. So let's talk about the ripple effect. So when we make this a part of how we manage, how we lead, what went well, what could be better. Here's a tip. I noticed this. I have a concern. When we bring that type of atmosphere to our team, what is the ripple effect out to the culture of the business and then further on to the clients?
And for me, it keeps coming back to it's creating a culture of feedback, right? And so it starts it starts within a team. And if we've got a whole team comfortable with sharing, this went well, it would be even better if, from a things we do as a team perspective or project perspective, then it's easier to do it from an individual perspective. And then when you have that, it's easier to recognize it within other departments, right? Rather than let silos build and fester. If we're giving that positive reinforcement, we're checking our assumptions. If we're working on a project collaboratively, we could do the same thing. What really worked about this, and what would we do differently next time?
Mm.
Or in the middle of it, what's working about it? What's missing? What else do we need to be doing? And then that kind of stuff just keeps spreading. And if teams are cohesive with feedback, positive in the tips, and then that branches out to the other departments where we work together, and then so on and so on, it's just creating more of a stronger culture of feedback. People want feedback,
Yeah.
right? We're increasing transparency, we're increasing trust, because we can share those things that maybe we're not as comfortable to share,
Mm-hmm.
make mid-course corrections a lot faster. I'd like to say it spreads as fast as positive reinforcement, but I think nothing spreads as fast as positive reinforcement. The positive reinforcement makes the tip side easier.
I used to think, oh, people don't want me to get in their business. People need to learn their own way, and I felt really uncomfortable giving constructive feedback in a lot of circumstances where people actually wanted it. And I even had, like, I would say probably 10 years ago, I had a friend that was like, I want you to tell me if I'm ever like, going off the rails.
Yeah.
And I was like, gosh, I just don't even know how to do that. I struggle with conflict. I hate conflict. I don't like, how would I even do that? So getting more comfortable with the what went well, what could be even better, and making it more of it sounds more like a conversational tone rather than like, let's sit down and talk about what happened and what you're doing wrong. This is so it's just bringing that in. So typically in the past, what we've done as leaders is we've brought somebody in, trained them, and then they do their job until, performance gap. Now we have to have the hard conversation.
Yeah.
So these are just a couple things that we're adding in proactively so that that hard conversation hopefully never has to happen. And if it does, it's very short and sweet and to the point. And
well, and you want it to be a real true culture of feedback. In our collaboration, we do this because we'll debrief stuff all the time. What worked about
yeah.
that would make it even better. We did the first cohort, what worked well about that, what would make it even better. We did some work with a professional sports team, and it was really interesting when we got to the part about feedback. And we didn't have players in the session, but we had the coaching staff in the session along with the business leaders. And to me, what was really beautiful was they said, look, if you're an athlete, you want and will listen to constructive feedback.
Absolutely.
Tell me more about that. And they just say, look, because it's gonna result in what kind of game time you get, field time you get, and whether or
Mm-hmm.
not you're seen as a team player, right? And so those tips, those suggestions are free flowing because we all got the same end goal in mind,
Right.
right? Is to win the game.
Mm-hmm.
We need to be able to kind of transfer that thinking to business
Mm-hmm.
and create that environment where feedback is appreciated, it is valued, it
Yes.
is necessary even to achieving the goal.
And
But I
that is covered in one of our creeds that we talk about a constant desire to grow, a constant to grow, and incorporating that into the business, into everyone's
yeah,
mind.
and that creative growing is not just about learning, it is about growing, and you grow through feedback.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
that's such a huge way to grow.
Hmm.
But then I'm going to study on my own, try to perfect it on my own, and fingers crossed I'm doing enough versus, gosh, I have to look inward a lot more. That's what growth is all about. What worked about this? What would make it even better? What do I do differently? What
Hmm.
How can I challenge my own, how can I challenge creativity and innovation?
Right.
Feedback is just important for all of this.
So if I'm a leader and I've been doing it the old way all along, not positive reinforcement, not constructive feedback, only, the writing up conversation. Can you give me practical, real, like what can I do this week to change that, to bring this into my culture? Like what's a real small baby step, maybe 3 or 4 baby steps that we can take to incorporate this in?
And I would say start with the positive reinforcement because that is just a flat out good thing to do. Another practical tip is start with some of the easy stuff, the projects that you're working on or the team meetings that you have. Get the group opening up about what really worked well and celebrate that. Set the tone of, look, good people want to get better and we get better through feedback. So what I want us to do as a team is really look at the things that we do, celebrate those wins, and feel good about what we've done. And I always want us to ask ourselves, what could we do differently, and what kind of different outcome would it get? And I know you guys have great ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Just make that part of a practice of what we do with the projects that we have, the collaborations that we have,
Events.
events that we have.
Right.
And maybe sometimes we got to do those check-ins along the way. But I really want us creating a culture of feedback where we, again, feel good about the things that we're doing well, but constantly challenge ourselves on what we could do.
Well, and I think you covered this in the intensive where you talked about having regular meetings with your people, like making time for your people where you have regular one-on-ones proactively.
Yep.
And if there's no tips and no constructive feedback, then give them positive reinforcement and talk about their personal life. Get to know them a little bit better. But so that's another practical tip is like create that cadence and that schedule to where you have those opportunities already on the books.
When you commit to one-on-ones with your team, you're saying they're important. And those meetings, you can have business related meetings. When you're focusing on a one-on-one, it's whatever they want to talk about. It's their meeting. You can look for opportunity to give positive reinforcement, maybe even tips come up as a part of that. When you're having one-on-ones, you're really establishing a strong foundation with them in connection. And when you do that, then the tip stuff becomes so much easier to give because you've got a connection and a relationship.
Beautiful.
Focus on that first, and then the feedback opportunities will present themselves.
Right.
But when you're
Okay.
building a strong foundation, you can get to the tip part pretty easily.
I think those are some good, solid, practical steps that people can start with today.
And easy enough to do, right?
Absolutely. That seems very easy to
Nothing
do.
that's going to take you hours upon hours upon
Right.
hours.
So, what kind of challenge should we issue this week for our listeners?
I'd say think about it yourself. So here's just one easy action to take, which is take a look at maybe something you've been involved in recently and ask yourself what went well with that and what would have made it even better. Your other challenge can be if you're meeting with your team regularly, set feedback as an expectation, and ask the team for their input on how we can recognize the good and celebrate the wins and still push, challenge, and support each other for taking it to the next level.
Ooh, I love that. I'm going to incorporate that into our board meetings.
Yeah, yeah, and when you're having meetings, that's perfect. You don't necessarily need to do it with every meeting, but meetings to me are an easy way to just check what's working about them, what would make them
Mhm.
better or add more value.
Okay.
Because sometimes the routine stuff we do gets old and stale
Hmm.
and it doesn't make them ineffective, yet we still have the opportunity to look at how can we make them more effective.
Perfect. I love it. Beautiful. Okay. There's your challenge, folks. Incorporate this into your meetings, incorporate this into your life. What went well and what would make it better next time. All right. If you want more information about Heart Profit, you can find it at heartprofit.org. We have a new cohort starting in the fall, so y'all get signed up for that. And we will see you guys next week. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.